Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. My mic was not working for some reason. Um, and then I tried to reset my mic and I accidentally turned my camera off. So I figure I just restart the stream. Um, see. You're fine, Eddie. Thank you. How's it going, everyone? How's life? What I was rambling about before our freaking microphone shut off, was today I got a new bed. So I had a full-size mattress, and I upgraded to a queen.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy, wow. Comrade Chewy has subscribed for 4 months, resubscribed. Thank you so much, for your support, Comrade Chewy. Appreciate you. Enjoy hanging out with you in the streams, so thank you for your support. Yeah, so I was setting up my bed. That took like 2 hours, and then I have to give a kid a tour of the college that I work at later today, because that's something coaches do, is tour prospective athletes, prospective students for the college. So gonna do that. How's everyone else doing? What's everyone up to today? I am a tanky as well. I am a tanky as well. Watch Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang. I would second that. Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang is a great movie. Extremely revealing movie. One of the first movies I watched about the DPRK that kind of broke down some of the Western narratives about Korea, and a lot of the Western lies about Korea, including a lot of the history. And I remember the first time I saw it, I didn't believe it. You know, I didn't really believe it. I was like, this can't be real. Or I'm not just gonna trust this. Which everyone thinks, I'm just a tanky who supports every communist country, but it's like, I was a brainwashed American like everyone else. I was like, no way the DPRK is not crazy. They're just an authoritarian country run by a crazy leader, and they hate the U.S. for no reason. And then the more I looked into it, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, everything I know is a lie. So like one of the first movies I watched about Korea, or one of the first things I looked into about North Korea, the DPRK, was Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang. And I was like, this cannot be real. Like, like there's no way there's an entire industry in South Korea of defectors. Or there's no way there's a South Korean intelligence agency created by the U.S. Whose sole job is to pay North Koreans, offer them like a couple $1,000s to leave the country, and then talk bad about their home country. And there's a TV show. Oh, we got a hype train, and somebody gifted a subscription. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate that. Y'all are the reason that I was able to afford a queen-size bed and upgrade from my full-size mattress, which had a lot of stains on it and was very, very old and gross. I was quite poor for a while. Now I have enough money to buy a bed, so thank you. Thank you. China versus U.S. narrative. Oh, this is 2 minutes long. All right, this looks like a good one to watch. Oh, from Bodhichevik Bolsatva. I follow this comrade on Twitter. They have a lot of good stuff to say about China, and really, in general. So, let's check this out. The title of this video is China versus U.S. narrative. So, can everyone see it? I hope so. Let's play it. No, the UN did not report China has massive internment camps for Uyghur Muslims. If China is anti-Islam, why are these Chinese Muslims enjoying a faith revival? Good question. I probably don't have to pause. 50 ambassadors throw weight behind China. Tiananmen Square massacre is a myth. We're all remembering British lies. Most of what we hear about China is red scare, yellow peril, So this is just explaining China's system. This is just a bunch of good articles about China as opposed to what the U.S. says about them. That's cool. Like I said, that person, you should follow them, Bodhisattva Bhatva. They have a lot of good China content. Here's a good vid on a time Kamala Harris recently ended an interview by acting like she couldn't hear the interviewer. Oh, I actually did see this. So
Kamala Harris.
Y'all know I don't pay that much attention to like everyday politics, as in like what Joe Biden and what Kamala Harris are saying, and like what corporate media is reporting about the White House in Washington, because obviously it's just mostly nonsense and it's mostly a distraction. But I did see this because this was insane. Did we react to this on the stream already? We might have.
Harris went on Charlemagne the God show to talk about the Biden administration's agenda. But near the end of the interview, Charlemagne asked a question that caught the vice president completely off guard. He asked, "Who's the real president of this country, Joe Biden or Joe Manchin?" Harris's spokesperson immediately tried to end the interview and played the old "you're breaking up" trick.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me, Madam Vice President?
Oh, I'm sorry. You got it right.
Oh.
So I'm sorry to interrupt.
This exchange ended up going viral because it raised a very real...
They should have played the whole video. The whole video is just insane. Like, he just asks her a question, you know, is Joe Manchin, like this person said, is Joe Manchin the president or Joe Biden the president? And then her aide pops in like, oh, we have to end. And then they're like, we're breaking up. It's incredible.
Senator Joe Manchin, a right-wing Democrat from West Virginia, has been withholding his vote from Biden's...
A right-wing Democrat? Isn't that all the Democrats?
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy. It is. All the Democrats are right-wing. Joe Manchin is just more open about it.
The landmark social spending bill, the Build Back Better plan. The Build Back Better plan would allocate almost $2 trillion to climate programs, schools, healthcare. But without Manchin's vote, the Democrats would only have 49 votes, one shy of passing the bill in the Senate. Manchin has been using his vote to extract concessions. For example, Manchin opposed the bill saying...
Yeah, we all know this. The U.S. Congress can't even pass a half measure. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We're facing a climate crisis.
Yeah. Socialism.
Whoa. Someone just tipped us $10 and we heard the "yeah, socialism" sound effect that we don't get very often. Thank you so much. You inspire me to keep learning. Thanks, buddy. Thank you, my friend. Thank you just for hanging out with us, but also thank you so much for that tip. Really appreciate it, for real. Totally not necessary either, but really appreciated. Have you checked out any of Second Thought's videos? Yes, Sam. We have watched Second Thought on the show. He's great. And now, I don't know if people know this, but Second Thought has a podcast with Hakeem and Ugopnik. So I haven't ever sat down with Hakeem, although we've talked about doing it. But I have done podcasts with Ugopnik, who's communist from the former Yugoslavia. And Hakeem, if people don't know, is a doctor, Marxist-Leninist from Iraq who makes amazing YouTube videos. Hakeem, Ugopnik, and Second Thought have a podcast called Deprogrammed. It's quite good. Quite great, actually. It's one of the best podcasts in existence right now. The CIA documents about funding Islamic extremism and spreading anti-communist propaganda from your video the other day was so helpful to teaching people how this genocide is imperialist propaganda. Oh, thank you for the follow. Yes, thank you for that comment. And, you know, I appreciate you saying that to me. But really, we should be thanking Vijay Prashad, because he put together that chapter in Washington Bullets called Hope Lay in the Muslim Revival, which was from a CIA document, a statement from a CIA document, where they said they wanted to fund right-wing extremist groups in Muslim-majority countries all over the world to try and stop socialism from taking hold, because, you know, Muslim-majority countries were having very powerful working-class socialist movements growing in them at the time. And yeah, so like that's been going on. The U.S. now has been carrying out that plan for like 50 years, 60 years, where they're funding these right-wing extremists in Muslim-majority countries, and then when there's a bunch of terror attacks in China, by U.S.-backed, U.S.-supported groups, and China does something about it, the U.S. goes genocide. You're doing a genocide. So yeah. That's the contradictions of imperialism. Falun Gong Uncensored has subscribed.
Yeah, boy.
Thank you, Falun Gong Uncensored. That's a funny name. Some pan dude has resubscribed for 2 months. Thank you, some pan dude. You're the best pan dude I've ever met in my Twitch chat. Thank you so much for your support. If you're trying to get some documentaries, let me know. Here's a good doc of readings about the DPRK specifically. Let's check this out. Appreciate you for sending this. Must read books for understanding Korea. Patriots, Traitors, and Empires. The story of Korea's struggle for freedom. Is this The Korean War by Hugh Dean? That's one of the main books I would recommend for sure. Oh, this is like an infographic. Interesting. Facts you need to know about Korea. We killed off 20% of the population. U.S. Air Force General Curtis LeMay, head of the Strategic Air Command during the Korean War. U.S. planes dropped 635,000 tons in bombs and 32,000 tons of napalm.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy. North Korean fighters and allies. In between 400,000 and 750,000 dead and missing. Korean civilian casualties, 2.5 million. 1.55 million from the DPRK. 75% of Pyongyang was destroyed. Historians say biowarfare was used against communist forces. Terrible. And it's definitely true. And U.S. bombers with nuclear arms were deployed, which is just insane. And another... I don't remember if it was Curtis LeMay himself or one of the other U.S. Air Force higher-ups at the time, but they said they bombed every building in Korea over 2 stories tall. So there was nothing left to bomb. And literally, American pilots were complaining. They were saying there's literally nothing left to bomb. But, the North wouldn't give up. They continued to fight for independence. They had just won their freedom from colonialism. And now they're facing this horrific aggression from the United States. And even after losing 20% of their population and having their country divided in half and having every building over 2 stories tall bombed into the dust. Oh, thank you for the subscriptions. I see 2 subscriptions in the chat. Thank you very, very much. Oh, hype train incoming. Sweet. So the North wasn't about to just... give up. They had just overthrown the Japanese colonizers, and basically the U.S. just had to give up. They had to divert their attention elsewhere because they were spending so much money bombing Korea and basically, bombed everything they could and killed everyone they could. And they realized these people still weren't going to give up. So they just put, the most stringent economic sanctions in history on them, which, for those who don't know, other than Cuba, the U.S. economic sanctions on North Korea are the most stringent of any sanction in human history, to try and stop this country from getting food, from trading with the rest of the world, from developing. And the worst of it actually came in the 90s when there were a series of floods in the in Korea, that destroyed a lot of their agriculture that they had built up since the war in the 50s. And Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang, the documentary we've been talking about, talks about this a lot. But the CIA would go to the border of Korea and China, which is not a super heavily regulated border. So a lot of Koreans were obviously going into China at the time to flee the famine. And the CIA sent agents to sit at the border, and they would pay Koreans a sack of rice if they would bring back telephone lines, or if they would bring back the tail of a cow. With the idea being trying to starve these people out, trying to, on top of enforcing these economic sanctions that prevent them from trading with the rest of the world, also destroy their electricity and their sources of power by sabotaging the electricity lines, or sabotage their agriculture by having people kill cows in exchange for food. In exchange for food, so the U.S. is starving these people and then offering them food if they'll sabotage their own country. The most horrific stuff you can imagine, and we look at them and we think they're crazy, and we think they're evil, and we think they're authoritarian. It's like, then what are we? Right? Then what the hell do you call the U.S. and what we've done to Korea? So, thank you for the hype train. Hong Kong Uncensored also subscribed. That's kind of weird. That's kind of weird that Falun Gong Uncensored and Hong Kong Uncensored just subscribed at the same time. Falun Gong, for those who don't know, is like a right-wing cult, which is backed by the U.S. State Department, who believes the Chinese Communist Party is evil. And they have a giant propaganda arm that publish like Trump stuff, and they were like really pro-Trump, and then they obviously publish a ton of propaganda about China. Like, that's where the organ harvesting narrative comes from, is the Falun Gong, that idea that China is harvesting organs. Thank you for the hype train, by the way. Thank you for all the subscriptions. I gotta play this for the hype train. Oh, another subscription. Let's go. We had 100%. Let's go. This is sweet. Woo! Don't believe him. Falun Gong is the world's oldest religion. Okay. I tear down Falun Gong posters I see around town. That's crazy. And yeah, boy. Thank you for following. And it's crazy how like prevalent they are in like cities. I think they're prevalent in Canada as well as the U.S., but I know in the East Coast of the U.S. they're all over, staging protests about China, literally just trying to cook up support for imperialism. So crazy. Hype train level 2. I have no idea how that stuff works, the hype train and stuff. I just know it looks pretty sick when it goes hype train. It just seems hype, Okay, let's see what we have here. Why did they bomb them to start with? Like, how did they profit from it? They didn't want Korea to become communist. Like, back then, so it was a little bit of a different situation than now, right? Like, imperialism was still for profit, right? But there was more of an ideological war going on between communism and capitalism. So you had the Soviet Union and you had China, who were moving towards communism, and it looked like communism was sweeping across the East. Whoa, thank you for using 16 bits to cheer. I don't know what that means, but it looks sweet. Thank you. So communism was sweeping across the East, and the U.S. wanted to put a stop to it. So, the Cold War is said to not be a hot war, right? Because the Soviet Union and the U.S. never fired at each other. But they absolutely did. They just did it through all these different proxy wars, right? There are all these wars like Korea, where the Soviet Union was backing the communists fighting for their freedom, and the U.S. was backing a right-wing dictator while bombing the North. And it was to stop the spread of communism. And now the U.S., obviously, South Korea has been a capitalist ally to them. And largely the U.S. has helped build up South Korea so they can threaten the North. So there's that as well. But also they would prefer that the North be capitalist, right? So they can trade with the North and exploit the North, and corporations can exploit the North's labor like they can't now. And then they could also use Korea then to threaten China. So it would give them a geopolitical edge against the other, communist countries in the East, especially in the 50s when the Soviet Union was still around. So it was economic, but it was also ideological, with the idea that we want to continue to control Korea's economics. Thank you for the bits, y'all. Woohoo! Hey, Eddie, what is one of the biggest myths about the USSR that really grinds your gears? And what do you think about people that claim the USSR was a state capitalist country? Thank you, Jacob BCT 1968. Great question. If people who say the USSR was state capitalist, I would say that's probably an accurate term, but not quite accurate, but fairly accurate. But I mean, that's a good thing. It's the state controlling capitalism to try and transition into communism, which is socialism, right? So state capitalism isn't equivalent to socialism, but state capitalism isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're talking about a transitionary state. But it wasn't state capitalism because they weren't just focused on profits, right? It's not like the state was trying to generate profits. It had a different incentive for how it organized production. So largely due to World War II and due to the Western countries trying to destroy the socialist experiment in the Soviet Union, a lot of their productive forces at the beginning had to be focused on industrializing and building weapons, building up their military to defeat the Nazis who would eventually invade. But there were also things like they built tons and tons of schools, right? And they brought literacy from like 17% for women and 30% for men to 100%, right? So they focused their productive forces on not only self-defense but human development, right? So it was absolutely a different system than capitalism. And the thing that I dislike that people say about it the most is probably just that it didn't work, for those reasons. Or like when people when people try and say socialism didn't work, because it's like, it didn't work for who? Because for the something like 80% of their country who was taught to read and write because of the revolution, it was great, right? The only people who it failed for were the monarchs who were overthrown. And, eventually the country was dissolved, which was a huge victory for imperialism. But that didn't mean socialism failed, right? Socialism transformed this country into a powerhouse, and socialism defeated fascism. So, socialism, clearly, if you look at history, including the history of the Soviet Union, is our only way forward to creating a better and more equitable and more peaceful society. And not even that, but a more technologically advanced society. That's the other thing people underestimate about the Soviet Union, is the amount of like advancements they made in space technology and in science and even in like theories of education. Like we did a podcast fairly recently about Lev Vygotsky, who is still used in the U.S. In curriculums teaching education majors how to teach. He came up with all these theories about psychology and the psychology of education and education of children, which are still used today. They've just taken the revolutionary character out of what he said, right? What he actually said was like, education needs to be tailored to students' unique strengths and their weaknesses, and including disabled students. So it was his form of education was also intended to combat ableism that we see in capitalist education, and he's still taught in the U.S., like I said, but they just take the revolutionary character, everything revolutionary that he said, they remove from what he was teaching. But that's what the Soviet Union gave us. He was a product of the revolution. Right, it gave us a lot of advancements in all sorts of areas. So to say that it failed is, ridiculous. It failed in some things. It failed in its ultimate goal. It failed to defend itself from imperialism in many ways. The party eventually failed to remain connected to the working class. A lot of things did fail, but overall it was an incredible success for as far as socialist experiments go. Ain't no capitalist country inventing space travel. Only for billionaires. Only for people who want to go to space in a giant penis just for fun, because they own Amazon and everything else. They neoliberalized Vygotsky. Yes, that's the way to say it. Radical Disability, who probably, that based on your username, you might enjoy Vygotsky's work. So yes, they neoliberalized him, and I would recommend, especially education majors, check out what Lev Vygotsky actually wrote. And even his books, there have been chapters and full pages taken out of his books before they're published in the U.S. to try and remove the, like we said, the revolutionary character from his ideas and from his theories. The U.S. managed to corrupt the USSR from within. Yes, largely. Which is interesting, right? Because people always say, what's the worst thing about Stalin, right? He killed too many people. He was too authoritarian, the purges. But it's like, also, later on in the party, you know, they weren't doing that. They were much more open with who they allowed on the party, right? And it allowed the U.S. to infiltrate the country, right? And it just shows that a lot of times when socialist countries are doing things that seem authoritarian, it's in response to imperialism, right? It's in response to trying to stop other countries from infiltrating them and destabilizing them, which the U.S. is incredible at doing. You know, which we know the U.S. and their intelligence agencies have been doing since their inception. So, very interesting. Like, Eddie, did you know that the USSR had special education schools like they had before the USA? I did not know that, but that makes sense. Understanding Vygotsky's work, and that is very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And my whole family are basically teachers besides me. You know, they're all like education majors, so I love talking about that kind of stuff with them. Parenti once said there'd be no KGB if there was no CIA. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, the way I put it was authoritarianism in response to imperialism, but Parenti sums it up really well. If there was no CIA, there wouldn't be a KGB. One of the slides in my end of the year presentation on my senior thesis, which was about Venezuela and U.S. neocolonialism in Venezuela, and U.S. media narratives about Venezuela. One of the slides of that my presentation on the thesis paper itself was authoritarianism in response to imperialism. And it was just going through all the different things that Venezuela has done that have been portrayed as authoritarian by the U.S. and like what they were done in response to. Like, why did Venezuela go ahead with this policy? And it was always something that the U.S. was doing to try and destabilize them, right? So, very interesting. How do CPUSA meetings go? It depends. It depends on if you're meeting to organize something, or if you're just having a regular party meeting. Party meetings, you know, people bring stuff up. There can be motions to bring stuff up, and they usually have an agenda. But, like, meetings to actually get stuff done, we'll have, like, an agenda, you know, of what we're going to talk about, but it's more open. And then a lot of it is just assigning roles. You know, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to talk to these people, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. Did you know that their special ed schools were closer to a mental ward than a school? No, but that's sad. If it's true. I fell in love. I mean, I'm sure that's what the U.S. portrayed it as, but it could be true, too. I don't know. I fell in love with Vygotsky after reading your published article on him. Wow, thank you. Especially his writings on education for people with disabilities like me, Asperger's. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for having the courage to talk about that, for real. That's awesome. I'm glad you liked that video. And we did an interview, actually, in a podcast with Curry Mallet, Currymallot, who wrote that Lev Vygotsky piece. So we interviewed him about Vygotsky, if you want to check that out. But I appreciate you saying that, and I'm really glad that that our work reached someone like you. Someone who, I don't know, just someone who it touched, I guess. Sometimes you forget, you know, that people are actually reading these things, right? And people are actually watching these things, and people are actually engaging with them, and it can affect them, you know. So, yes, thank you for sharing. Am I the only one who has come to dislike the term democratic socialism because it implies a false narrative that socialism is inherently undemocratic? Yes. Yes. You are not the only one. I have said the same thing. It's like all socialism is democratic. You're democratizing the economy. Right? We have political democracy, but we don't have, or we have the most unequal economy you could imagine. So our entire political system is controlled by the capitalists who run the economy. And the economy largely needs to be democratized if we're going to ever even dream of having real democracy. So, any form of socialism is going to be inherently democratic. It's going to give the power to the people rather than this minority that currently controls our society called capitalists. Oh, here's some education statistics about the Soviet Union. This is just higher and secondary education total increased 20% in a handful of years. Wow. Specialized secondary education. Very cool.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, boy. That's what I have to say about the Soviet Union building schools and educating people. Yeah, boy. Here's someone sent the article that we were talking about, by the way. Vygotsky's Revolutionary Educational Psychology by Curry Mallet and Liberation School. And Liberation School, for those who don't know, that's they're connected with PSL. It basically is PSL. It's people from PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So they're pretty cool, or they're really cool, actually. And then, hey, there's me live. Want to watch myself? David Pakman is a liberal propaganda. Oh, I want to watch that. I agree. And I used to watch David Pakman. All right, we're going to watch that after this. But here's podcast number 15 with Curry Mallet talking about educational psychology. Old short video about Christmas and capitalism. Okay, might check that out.
Hello, Merry Christmas.
The
and a
holiday
Happy New
season
Year.
is upon
Today I
us.
thought I'd make a
Too
fun
many
little
videos at
reaction video and
Alright, we gotta watch this. So I used to watch David Pakman. For those who don't know, he's basically a liberal. Like, he's one of those people where it's like he's in the new media sphere, right? He's considered like, he's similar to like Kyle Kulinski or whatever, these left-wing new media, or quote-unquote left-wing new media YouTube personalities. But he's like the closest you can get to MSNBC on YouTube, right? Like, he is a new media person. He mostly does his own stuff. I know he has like a producer, like people who help him out with the show or employees or whatever. So he's not like a giant corporation, right? He's still a YouTuber, which is, they refer to themselves as new media, or that's been the label. A lot of them are just social democrats, not a lot of communists. But he's very liberal. Like, I don't even know if I would consider him a social democrat at all. Like, he doesn't even have that many policies that aren't just neoliberal technocratic half measures. So I'm really excited to see that Hakeem did a video on him because I'm aware of who he is. And I used to watch his stuff. I actually recommended him to my dad once. So let's check this out.
one video kind of stood out to me. Why I'm Not a Socialist by David Pakman. Fine, not a me. Hello, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all. Today I thought I'd make a fun little reaction video, and one video kind of stood out to me. Why I'm Not a Socialist by David Pakman. Fine, not a me, Brager you
I want mommy, I want milk, I want to be held, I want to be comforted.
video, but educational nonetheless. I'm unfamiliar with him, but this seems like the fabled social democratic theory spoken of only in legends, so
Interesting. Hakeem is unfamiliar with him, and I am familiar with David Pakman, so maybe I'll be able to add some stuff. Who knows?
let's take a look and have some fun. Slight preface, no hate towards this guy. I've just been sent this video a lot, so why not, I thought. Otherwise, like I
I don't think he's a bad guy either, Pakman. He seems like a good dude, just like a lib.
said, I'm not really familiar with his political positions, let's say. Anyway, so he starts off by defining that he's a social democrat and is for a socially guided market economy. Nothing too weird here. Let's see what else he has to say.
What's your position, David? And I've mentioned before that I'm not a socialist. I'm a social democrat in the sort of Nordic or Swedish tradition. And today I'm going to explain to you why I am not a socialist. And I'm happy to do this. It's something that's been an area of study.
Is it because you love imperialism, David? Is it because you want to live with the spoils of imperialism like the Nordic countries you love so much? Is that what it is, David?
For me, since undergraduate and even including in graduate school,
This is something that stood out to me immediately. How have you been studying this for around half a decade and still not evolved past the most basic social democrat talking points? He seems to show an incomplete understanding as to why social democracies currently exist, and even further ignorance as to what currently sustains them.
Fundamentally, I'm not a socialist because I want an egalitarian, free, self-determining society. And that type of society will not emerge from authoritarian apparatus.
An egalitarian, free, self-determining society. Capitalism doesn't provide that, Habibi. Historically, it was the threat of socialist revolution that pushed egalitarian principles and political agendas to the forefront. The nonsense authority point is as wrong as it is boring at this point. Capitalism is an inherently authoritarian system. Getting kicked out of your job and being forced to be homeless on the street because you missed a rent payment or had a medical bill you couldn't pay apparently isn't authoritarian. Regardless,
I had somebody send me a video or an article today. I guess this is being pushed by U.S. media that Chinese soccer players or football players are not going to be allowed to have tattoos, that the government was banning tattoos, and I was looking into it, and it looks like it's not true. You know, the U.S. media took a press release from some sports agency in China and extrapolated these conclusions. You know, there wasn't like a hard and fast rule that came out in China banning tattoos. But, you know, I pointed out to my friend who sent me that, I'm like, there are so many jobs in the U.S. that don't let you have tattoos, that make you cover up your tattoos or won't hire you if you have a tattoo in a spot that shows. Like, how is that not authoritarian? And then he literally said, like, well, in the U.S. that's private companies, and in China it's the government. And I'm like, so only the government can be authoritarian? Like, just because it's the government and not private companies running your life, it's okay? And he was like, I guess that makes sense.
he probably would rebut, but social democracies have protective nets against these sort of things. Well, that's true in part, but where do you think the wealth for all that came from? Don't you think authoritarian means were used to secure the resources that allow for those safety nets? Firstly, many beacons.
Was it authoritarian for Denmark and Norway to stop Cuba and Venezuela's COVID payments from going through so those countries could get the vaccine? The Nordic countries allowed like 90% of the payments from Venezuela and Cuba for the vaccine to go through, and then blocked the last 10% of like these $100,000, whatever, $1 million transactions, so they could prevent these countries from getting the vaccine. You know, even though apparently the U.S. embargo on Venezuela and Cuba doesn't affect medical supplies, according to the State Department and liberals. Is that not authoritarian? Is it not authoritarian to starve people so you can continue exploiting their country for cheap resources? Like, that seems pretty authoritarian from the Nordic countries.
Of social democracy, like Britain and France, were massive imperial powers that built their wealth on the destruction of indigenous industry, colonial taxes, and the direct theft of the areas and peoples they've subjugated. Secondly, even those countries, like Norway, that didn't have direct empire still exploit the imperial periphery via unequal exchange and value transference. Companies in social democratic countries still take advantage of cheap immigrant labor at home and cheap imperial periphery labor abroad. They still rely on market preference via IMF restructuring of the ruled economies that puts the core in advantage over the periphery. This is something made beautifully clear in the works of Zach Cope, John Smith, and Tensuandi, and others, which I cannot recommend enough. Regardless, social democracy basically advocates for, rather than stripping the bourgeoisie of their unearned privilege and stolen wealth, we instead grovel at their feet for small concessions that they'll regally laud over you as some great self-sacrificing favor, despite the fact that workers, much like yourself, were the originators of all that wealth that's providing for those concessions in the first place.
So Hakeem gives the good Marxist analysis of we can't, workers create all the value, so why would we, grovel at the feet of capitalists? Which is a great point. And, the major failure of social democrats or people who are against political revolution and socialism, their main failure is believing that we can convince the bourgeoisie to give up their wealth, right, or to stop seeking profits. And this is something Marx understood, that capitalists become personifications of their own capital, right, because their businesses are their livelihoods, and if they don't continue to make more and more and more and more profit, their business would go under. They are going to continue to do whatever they need to do to continue to make more and more profit, which is exploit workers as much as possible. So it's a giant game to maximize exploitation between the capitalists, and there's no way that they're going to put their own morality ahead of their own profits. This is never going to happen. So this idea that we need to grovel at their feet and beg them to give us free healthcare, like, there's a reason that hasn't been working. There's a reason the last 40 years in the US and the UK, the governments have been dismantling social reforms, right, and social welfare programs. It is because we aren't organized as workers, right? It's because they're not giving us these things out of the goodness of their heart. They are things that need to be fought for. You know, when FDR was president, there were like 1 million card-carrying communists in the U.S. or some ridiculous number like that. You know, they were threatening to actually
Yeah, boy.
take power as workers, and that's how they got some reforms. So, you know, social democrats incessantly believe that, you know, the morality of the bourgeoisie, of the capitalists, will eventually, you know, encourage them to give us health care or whatever else. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. You know, we need to threaten to take power and actually build organs of worker power to fight the bourgeoisie, not to beg them for healthcare and education.
And what that means is that at the national level, socialist and communist structures are fundamentally authoritarian. And at scale, enacting socialism or communism.
Fundamentally authoritarian. Think about that. Those two words. Fundamentally authoritarian. What does that even mean? When I think of fundamentally authoritarian, I think of like capitalism. Like a system where every single person is working all day and the surplus value of what they create is going to a handful of people who don't work, and then those people who don't work also control the media and the government and everything. That is the most fundamentally authoritarian system I could possibly think of, other than the slavery, which this current authoritarian system was built on. So I don't know what he means by they're fundamentally authoritarian. Like, they fundamentally require authority? Yes. Like every society does. And, you know, like, every change of societal structures in history has come from a clash and a battle over authority, right? So it's just a question of who has the authority. Is it the workers or the capitalists? And right now they have all of it. So I guess maybe it is fundamentally authoritarian, as in all societies are fundamentally authoritarian, and it's just a matter of which class has the authority.
Are fundamentally authoritarian. And at scale, enacting socialism or communism becomes authoritarian.
Repeating the same point, basically. It's a tired centrism. When the capitalist class does whatever it has to do in order to secure its wealth, power, and privilege, that's just how life is. But when a working class government does the same, it's all of a sudden authoritarian. Rules for thee, not for me, yada yada. If you're interested in a deeper dive into this, I made a video concerning authoritarianism you can check out here. Just know, authoritarianism is a two-way street. Socialists are just honest enough to admit that political aims may require authoritarian means, whatever those may be. Those that support capitalism also understand this. They just cover it up with sophistry and ideology in a limp attempt at seeming more respectable and reasonable, despite presiding over a system that has historically, as well as in the modern day, been far more barbaric than anything that's preceded it. Behind every nice-seeming social democrat is a neoliberal, or even worse, a fascist, why am I saying the same thing 3 times, that will bomb, murder, interfere, sabotage, and destroy in order to secure higher profits against the backdrop of token outrage from the oh-so-reasonable social democrats.
And probably the best example of that is Rosa Luxemburg, one of the greatest communist theorists of all time, great activist in the Soviet Union, was killed by collaborating fascists and social democrats, which largely was a huge blow to the socialist struggle in Germany. And of course, if Germany would have gone socialist at the same time that the USSR did, that would have been amazing for human history. Would have avoided a lot of horrible things like World War II.
Vietnam, Iraq, Grenada, history is my witness. Take a look at the works, late Victorian Holocausts, The Triumph of Evil, Killing Hope, or honestly any book on modern imperialism to see for yourself. Or hell, even Michael Parenti's Against Empire. Very highly recommended.
And a top example is Venezuela.
And here's why you shouldn't listen to what this guy has to say, by and large. Habibi.
Alright, I gotta head out soon, but let's finish this part about Venezuela.
Venezuela is a social democratic country. They have made no serious attempts at surpassing capitalism, challenging the market, or even destroying the power of the capitalist class. There is no central plan. The working class doesn't hold sole political power. Private property hasn't been abolished. There is still wage labor. I can go on. I don't know how many times this needs to be said, but socialism isn't when the government does stuff, nor is it when a party has a socialist in the name. At the beginning of the video, he seems to understand this distinction, but when it comes to actual material realities, he's completely off the mark. Pakman's contention seems to boil down to not why I'm not a socialist, but more to why I prefer the social democracies of white.
Yeah, how does he point to the Nordic countries and then say Venezuela is the reason that socialism fails? So it's like Venezuela, as Hakeem said, is very similar to a social democratic country. They've renationalized their oil company, kicked U.S. private interests out of their oil company, and then used the revenue from their nationalized oil to fund social programs, basically. And there have been There are probably more efforts to build socialism in Venezuela than what Hakeem was describing. Like, there are these workers' councils, and there are like 7,000 or so communes where workers sort of make the productive decisions, and they get funding and support from the government. But basically, they're a social democracy. It's just rather than getting to trade with the U.S. like the Nordic countries do, Venezuela's under 166 economic sanctions. So how could you look at them and say, oh, that shows how socialism fails, but the Nordic countries are good? No, that shows what would happen if one of the Nordic countries were under an embargo. If the U.S. surrounded one of the Nordic countries with their military and started siphoning or not letting them trade, and blocking them off from trading with the rest of the world, the Nordic countries would look probably worse than Venezuela. So, interesting video there. Unfortunately, I have to head out. Pretty short stream today, but I have work to do. So thank you all for hanging out with me. Thank you for watching that video. Or thank you for the videos you sent. Thank you to all the moderators. Oh, Trans Marxist subscribed while we were watching that. Thank you very much.